Imagine this. You're sitting in a Las Vegas casino, lights flickering all around, adrenaline pumping through your veins. You just lost an amount that could support dozens of families for life. But instead of walking away, you place another bet, and another, and another, until everything's gone. This isn't a Hollywood movie plot. This is the real story of one of America's biggest sports stars who publicly admitted, "I lost more money than most people earn in 10 lifetimes." And he's not alone. Charles Barkley, the basketball legend who couldn't leave the casino. Charles Barkley, MVP, a name every basketball fan knows. 11-time NBA All-Star, member of the legendary Dream Team at the 1992 Olympics, the 1993 MVP. His career achievements are stunning: over 23,000 points, nearly 12,000 rebounds, and in 2006, he was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame with honors. After finishing his playing career, Barkley became one of the most popular commentators on television. His frankness, sharp mind, and incredible sense of humor made him a favorite of millions of viewers. It seemed like life after sports turned out perfectly. But there was one secret that Charles hid from the public for a long time. In 2006, Barkley spoke publicly for the first time about what had been haunting him for years. "I have a gambling problem," he confessed in an interview. According to his own words, throughout his career he lost between $10 and $30 million. The figure is so staggering it's hard to believe. That's more than the annual budget of a small city. Barkley told how his favorite game was blackjack. He could spend entire nights at casino tables, making bets of hundreds of thousands of dollars per hand. Once he lost $1 million in one night, not in a week, not in a month, in one night. For an ordinary person, this would be a catastrophe. But for Barkley, it was just one of many such nights. What's most frightening? He couldn't stop even when he realized the problem. "When you're in a casino, time stops," he said. "There are no clocks, no windows. You lose touch with reality." Las Vegas and Atlantic City casinos knew him as a VIP client who was given the best rooms, free drinks, and any other privileges. Also, he would keep playing. The psychology behind his addiction was complex. Barkley later explained that gambling gave him the same rush he felt on the basketball court. That feeling of competition, of risk, of being in the moment where everything could change with one decision. After retirement, he desperately sought that high again, and casinos provided it. The dealers knew his name, the pit bosses treated him like royalty, and every hand dealt felt like another championship game. Friends and family tried to intervene multiple times. His wife Maureen pleaded with him to stop. His former teammates called to check on him. But addiction doesn't listen to reason. Charles would promise to quit, would stay away from casinos for weeks, even months. Then something would trigger him. A bad day, stress from work, or sometimes just boredom, and he'd find himself back at the tables. The real turning point came in 2008 when Barkley was sued by the Wynn Las Vegas casino for unpaid debts of $400,000. This public scandal was a wake-up call for him. He realized he'd lost control of the situation. Charles publicly admitted his addiction and promised to change. Today, Barkley says he's overcome the worst. He still occasionally visits casinos, but has set strict limits for himself. "I'll never lose $1 million in one night again," he assures. His story is an example of how even the strongest and most successful people can become victims of addiction. John Daly, the golfer who lost over $50 million. If Barkley's story shocked you, get ready. John Daly, one of the most charismatic golfers in history, two-time major tournament winner, NE22, lost even more. By his own calculations, over 12 years, he lost between $50 and $60 million. Daly was never a typical professional golfer. With his long hair, bright clothes, and rebellious behavior, he stood out against the background of polite and restrained colleagues. Fans adored him for this, but behind the rebellion hid deep personal demons. His addiction started with slot machines. They became his curse. "I could sit at a machine for 10 to 12 hours without a break," Daly confessed. He told stories about losing $1.5 million in 24 hours. Once he lost $1.65 million in just 5 hours of play. The scariest thing is that Daly was losing not only his own money, but also money he hadn't earned yet. He took advances from sponsors, loans, mortgaged future winnings. Everything went into the machines. It was a disease, he says now. I knew I was losing, but I couldn't stop. His first wife told how John could go to a casino after a tournament, lose all the prize money, and come home with empty pockets. Once he won a tournament and got a check for $750,000. The ink hadn't dried yet when he was already at the casino. By next morning, all the money was gone. What made Daly's situation particularly heartbreaking was how the addiction affected his family. His children grew up watching their father destroy himself financially. His wives left him one after another, unable to watch the self-destruction continue. One of his ex-wives recalled finding him passed out at a slot machine at 6 in the morning, having been there all night, with casino chips scattered around him like confetti at a tragic party. The slot machines became his obsession because they offered instant gratification. Unlike golf, where you had to wait for results, plan your shots, think strategically, plan your shots gave immediate feedback. Pull the lever, instant result, win or lose in seconds. For someone with Daly's impulsive personality, this was like crack cocaine. The flashing lights, the sounds, the occasional small wins that kept hope alive, it all combined into a perfect storm of addiction. Daly tried to quit multiple times. He'd go cold turkey for weeks, throw himself into golf practice, spend time with his kids, but then he'd pass a casino on the way to a tournament, or see a commercial on TV, or just feel that familiar itch. And he'd be back telling himself, just 1 hour, or just $100. Those promises never held. The breaking point came when he realized he'd lost more money gambling than he'd earned playing golf, the sport he'd dedicated his entire life to. That realization was devastating. All those years of practice, all those tournaments won, all that talent, and it all went into machines programmed to take his money. Daly went through 4 divorces, partly because of his addiction. He lost houses, cars, almost everything he had. In 2006, he wrote an autobiographical book where he openly talked about his problems. I wanted people to know the truth, he said. Maybe my story will save someone else. Today, he says he doesn't play slot machines anymore. He realized it was destroying his life. But the path to recovery was long and painful. According to him, the hardest part was admitting he was powerless against this addiction. He attends therapy regularly, stays away from casinos, and has rebuilt relationships with his children. The scars remain, but he's learning to live with them. Ben Affleck, Hollywood star at the card table. Ben Affleck, two-time Oscar winner, one of Hollywood's biggest stars. His films collected billions of dollars at the box office. He was married to another superstar, though their marriage later fell apart. It seemed he had the perfect life. But Ben had a weakness: card games. Unlike previous heroes, Affleck didn't play slot machines or make random bets. He was a serious poker and blackjack player. So serious, in fact, that in 2014, the Hard Rock Casino in Las Vegas banned him from playing blackjack. The reason? He was too good. Affleck used card counting technique, ESE, legal but unpleasant for casino strategy. However, the problem wasn't that he was winning. The problem was how much time he spent at the tables. Paparazzi regularly photographed him at various casinos where he played for tens of thousands of dollars per hand. Once he was photographed at a poker table at 4 in the morning when he was supposed to be on set. In 2001, Affleck participated in a poker tournament against professionals and won. This showed how seriously he took the game. But his then-wife, Jennifer Garner, was less enthusiastic. Rumor has it that his passion for gambling was one of the reasons for their divorce in 2015. Affleck has been through rehab multiple times, officially for alcohol addiction, but insiders claim treatment included work on gambling addiction. In 2018, he publicly admitted he had problems and went back to treatment. Today, Ben rarely appears at casinos. He's focused on his career and relationships with his children. His story is an example that even smart, talented people can fall into the trap of addiction, and that admitting the problem is the first step to solving it. Tobey Maguire, Spider-Man in the web of underground poker. Tobey Maguire, star of the Spider-Man trilogy, seemed like a quiet and modest actor. But behind closed doors, he was one of the participants in the most scandalous underground poker game network in Hollywood history. These games, which later became the basis for the movie Molly's Game, were held in luxury hotels and private homes. The stakes were astronomical. Minimum buy-in was tens of thousands of dollars, and in one night you could lose or win millions. Participants included actors, directors, businessmen, and even members of organized criminal groups. Maguire wasn't just a participant in a margie. He was one of the organizers. He invited players, set rules, got his share. According to Molly Bloom, who organized these games, Tobey could be cruel and ruthless at the table. He used psychological pressure, manipulation, anything to win. One of the most scandalous stories involved a player who lost a large sum to Maguire. When he couldn't pay immediately, Tobey allegedly demanded that he crawl to him to get a deferment. This story, described in Bloom's book, showed the actor's dark side. When the FBI began investigating these underground games, Maguire was threatened with criminal prosecution. He faced charges of organizing illegal gambling. Eventually, he made a deal with investigators and avoided charges, but his reputation suffered. After the scandal, Maguire's career declined. He no longer got leading roles, producers avoided him. Today, he rarely appears on screens, and many believe his involvement in underground poker cost him his career. Gladys Knight, the soul legend who lost millions. Gladys Knight, called the Empress of Soul, is one of the greatest singers of all time. 7-time Grammy winner, owner of a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, she had everything. But Las Vegas casinos took millions from her. Knight loved baccarat, an elegant card game popular among high rollers. She could spend entire days at tables, making bets of tens of thousands of dollars. Casinos loved her. She was a generous player who rarely complained about losses. By various estimates, over the years, Knight lost between $1 and $3 million. For someone with her wealth, this might seem insignificant, but the problem was she couldn't stop. Even when she was losing, she came back again and again. In 2004, she was sued for unpaid casino debts. This was a public scandal that saddened her fans. Gladys was forced to admit the problem. She started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings and working on her addiction. Today, Knight rarely talks about that period of her life, but she doesn't hide that she struggled with gambling addiction. Her story is a reminder that addiction doesn't care who you are, a music legend or an ordinary person. Peter Schmeichel, the Great Dane, with a big problem. Peter Schmeichel, WDO, one of the best goalkeepers in football history. 5-time English champion with Manchester United, Champions League winner, he was unbeatable on the field. But off the field, he had his own battles. Early in his career, still playing in Denmark, Schmeichel got into gambling. He bet on football, horse racing, almost everything. It quickly got out of control. The young footballer was earning decent money, but it all went to bookmakers. Schmeichel told how there were moments when he didn't know how to pay rent because he'd lost everything. He took loans he couldn't repay. The situation was getting worse until the coach intervened. He found out about Peter's problem and gave an ultimatum: either treatment or the end of his career. This was a turning point. Schmeichel realized he was risking everything he dreamed of. He sought help from a psychologist and joined a support group. Gradually, he learned to control his impulses. When he moved to Manchester United and became one of the biggest stars in world football, those dark days were behind him. But Schmeichel never forgot his struggle. He regularly talks about the dangers of gambling, especially for young athletes. "If I hadn't stopped then, there wouldn't be the Peter Schmeichel the world knows," he says. His story is an example that even from a deep pit, you can climb out if you admit the problem and ask for help. Harry Kakavas, the Australian mogul, who lost $1.5 billion. Harry Kakavas was a real estate mogul from Australia who became one of the biggest losers in gambling history. Not just millions, Kakavas lost over 1.5 billion Australian dollars over a period of 15 months. Let that sink in. In just over a year, he gambled away more than most people could earn in 1,000 lifetimes. Kakavas was what casinos call a whale, an ultra-high roller who bets massive amounts. The Crown Casino in Melbourne rolled out the red carpet for him. They sent private jets to pick him up, gave him presidential suites, assigned personal hosts to cater to his every whim. Why? Because they knew he'd lose everything, and more. His game of choice was baccarat, and he played at stakes that would make most people's heads spin. He'd bet $300,000 per hand. In one 16-month period, he lost $164 in million. The casino loved him so much they gave him a credit line of $500,000, knowing he'd burn through it and ask for more. The truly tragic part? Kakavas later sued the casino, claiming they'd exploited his gambling addiction. He argued that Crown knew he had a problem, but continued to encourage him to gamble because they were profiting so massively. The court ultimately ruled against him, saying he was a sophisticated businessman who knew what he was doing. But was he really in control, or was his addiction controlling him? Kakavas' story shows how casinos are designed to keep you playing. They study psychology, understand human behavior, know exactly which buttons to push. For someone with a gambling addiction, these places are like putting an alcoholic in a bar and telling them to show restraint. The environment is specifically engineered to override rational thinking. Terry Watkins, the businessman who lost his empire. Terry Watkins built a successful business empire from nothing. Through hard work and smart decisions, he created multiple companies worth millions. He had employees who depended on him, a family who loved him, respect in his community, and he lost it all at the roulette table. Watkins's downfall was swift and brutal. What started as occasional casino visits for entertainment became an all-consuming obsession. He began using company funds to cover gambling losses, telling himself he'd win it back. But the wins never came, or when they did, he'd immediately gamble them away, chasing an even bigger score. The lying became second nature. He'd tell his wife he was at business meetings while sitting in a casino. He'd forge documents to hide the missing money. He'd take out loans against company assets without telling his business partners. The web of deception grew larger and more complex until it was impossible to maintain. When the truth finally came out, the consequences were devastating. His businesses went bankrupt, employees lost their jobs, business partners lost their investments. His marriage ended. He faced potential criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. Everything he'd spent decades building disappeared in less than 2 years. Watkins later said the worst part wasn't losing the money, it was losing people's trust. His children wouldn't speak to him. Former friends crossed the street to avoid him. The business community that once respected him now saw him as a cautionary tale. The shame was overwhelming. But Watkins' story doesn't end in tragedy. After hitting rock bottom, he entered treatment for gambling addiction. He worked with therapists to understand the underlying issues that drove his behavior. He made amends where he could, paying back what he could afford, apologizing to those he'd hurt. He started speaking publicly about his experience, hoping to prevent others from making the same mistakes. Today, Watkins has rebuilt a modest life. He'll never have the wealth he once had, and some relationships are damaged beyond repair. But he's sober from gambling, working an honest job, and slowly regaining self-respect. His message is clear. No amount of money is worth losing yourself. And here's that same person we talked about at the beginning. Remember the story from the very beginning? About the person who bet $10 million in one night? That was Charles Barkley. That same night at a Las Vegas casino, when he lost an amount that could buy dozens of houses, provide for hundreds of families. He sat at the blackjack table, making bets of $1 million per hand, unable to stop until everything was gone. The next morning, when he woke up in a hotel room and realized what happened, Barkley cried. Not from regret about the money, he'd earned enough to survive this loss. He cried because he realized he'd lost control of his life. That night became a turning point for him. It was after it that he first spoke publicly about his addiction. That's when he understood help was needed. The stories of all these people have one thing in common. Gambling addiction doesn't choose by status or wealth. It can strike anyone. But they're also united by hope. Each of them found the strength to admit the problem and start fighting. And if you or someone close to you recognize yourself in these stories, know that help exists. The first step is always the hardest, but it's the one that can save a life. Retry.